So the previous series referred to these developmental changes that occur in childhood, and we emphasized things like physical growth and maturation, brain development, motor development, both gross and fine motor control occurs at that time period. We talked about cognitive development related to Piaget and Vygotsky. Then we talked about language development and then, importantly, attachment. So we went through many of those domains in childhood. Now we're going to look at adolescence, what's happening at adolescence in those same domains, right? What's interesting is that many of the stage theories we have end in adolescence at one point or another, right? So either before adolescence or some point in adolescence. There are fewer stage theories we're going to talk about. We will talk about morality, though, in this context related to the development of uh, cognitive abilities in adolescence and adulthood. So we will talk about it. Now, what is adolescence? Adolescence is the window of time from puberty to adulthood, right? Now, puberty is marked by a host of things, but usually one of the primary markers for women is their first menstrual cycle, and for men is their first seminal emission. There are other pubertal changes that happen prior to that, but that's usually that midpoint of puberty. And then uh, adulthood, how do we define adulthood? Well, from a legal point of view, when you're 18, you're an adult. But from a psychological point of view, really it's when you assume adult like responsibilities or develop a sense of independence, right? So when you start working and when you're in the world and so forth, these are aspects of adulthood. So let's go into these three different uh, aspects of development: physical, cognitive, and social in adolescence. And they'll be in separate videos, but we'll keep the physical part in this video. So, puberty, right? I said puberty is a period of sexual maturation when a person becomes capable of reproducing. On average, for boys, puberty is about 13. For girls, it's about 11 or 12. But it's a range. There are a lot of things that could either expedite the development of puberty or hinder the development of puberty, right? So things like malnutrition could stunt one's growth and delay pubertal changes, right? So that would slow it down. We also know that we need a certain amount of adipose tissue or leptin in order to have one's first menstrual cycle. So we see that on average, people who are slightly overweight tend to hit puberty earlier in terms of women, that is. Now, I mentioned the concept of primary sex characteristics and secondary sex characteristics when we're talking about Turner syndrome and the effect Turner syndrome has on secondary sex characteristics. But let's redefine them. Primary sex characteristics are the body structures that are necessary for reproduction. So for women, it's your ovaries down, and for men, it's your testes down, right? Or I don't know if we say down, but whatever. Any of the reproductive organs. The reproductive organs are the ones that are essential for having a child. Now, the other post-pubertal changes, such as the deepening of the voice, the body hair, the enlargement of the breast, the widening of the hips, while these are common, they're non-essential for reproduction, right? So the secondary sex characteristics are non-reproductive uh, sexual characteristics. So the curves one has, right? There are different body types and body shapes. That is less important for reproduction than the ability to ovulate and the ability to release semen. So menarche and spermarchy. Menarche, archy typically means first, like or the typical or prototype, but a menarche refers to one's first menstrual cycle. It usually happens around 12 years old. Now, historically, we have seen the discussion about the menstrual cycle didn't happen. So earlier, there was a lot more anxiety and psychological distress linked to one's first menstrual cycle. But today, there's a lot more discussion and preparation, dialogue. And as a function of this preparation and discussion, it is viewed more positively. So, having one's first menstrual cycle. In fact, there are some people who put a basket together, right? And it has, a description of the changing body and some feminine hygiene products and some treats or sweets or whatever it is that the child likes. And they put it in the basket, and as it's a gift or celebration given to people who have their first menstrual cycle. And, it's more celebrated. And when that happens, people will view um, entering womanhood, having their first menstrual cycle more positively, right? Now, if I were to ask, I'm sure many people would say actually having one's menstrual cycle is annoying at times. It's uncomfortable at times. And I can't say I fully appreciate that or get that, but from a cognitive point of view, I understand that, right? Um, but if I were having the discussion about the importance of the menstrual cycle, it's symbolically, um, the ability to recreate life, right? So obviously, what that signifies is that you have ovulated and you'll have an ovum that was not fertilized, but the fact that you're releasing eggs or um, ovum suggests that you can produce life, and that's an exciting and beautiful thing, right? So that's the positive side of having one's menstrual cycle. Spermarchy is the first seminal emission, um, usually around 13 years old, oftentimes in the form of a nocturnal emission or in a dream state, right? So that's spermarchy. And obviously, the question is how much is known about these things. Usually, by the time uh, a male has their first seminal emission, they know exactly what it is. So the question is whether or not early maturation is a good thing, right? Whether hitting puberty earlier is a good thing. The answer is it depends. Oftentimes, boys will report it being a more positive experience because when they hit puberty earlier, there is a greater muscle development. They tend to be taller, they tend to be more athletic, and it leads to popularity in general because they're going to stand out relative to their peers. And that's desirable for boys. So it's viewed more positively. For girls, it's less positive, right? Girls oftentimes report that it's a stressful thing to hit puberty earlier because they feel out of sync, right, relative to their peers. If they're the only person who's developed, they might be teased by their peers. And post puberty, it's harder to gauge age. So oftentimes, younger teenage girls are subjected to catcalling, sexual harassment, unwanted solicitation of sexual activity, and so forth. So there's more stress that comes with hitting puberty earlier for girls. So um, later maturation, on the other hand, for girls is better. They tend to report they move from one group of people to another group. They don't feel as much out of sync, and they don't feel the pressure of early maturation and sexual gestures and harassment. So here is just a stylistic graphic to depict what some of the pubertal changes are and when they occur. Notice puberty is a process, right? Notice it also is a range, and there are a lot of things that happen, right? So if you look at it, um, there are a lot of things that happen prior to menarche. There are a lot of things that happen prior to spermarchy, right? And there are things that happen afterwards, right? So it's a range. Now, if I were to say, well, what is the range? It could be as early as 8 years old to 16 years old, right? Um, and there are a lot of factors that play a role there. Uh, and the same thing with boys, it's slightly later, but eventually by the end of childhood, they're all caught up. So, what's interesting, there is a period of time where girls are oftentimes taller than their male counterpart, right? Because they go into their growth spurt earlier than boys. They go into puberty earlier, so they're going to spike, and then boys will eventually catch up and oftentimes surpass height, right? So the average height for girls is about 5'4". Average height for boys is about 5'8" in North America. So that's our physical development in adolescence. We're going to talk about cognitive development separately.